So welcome to this Cycling Life Leadership Bytes. Today I will be joined by Bernard Moerman to interview Bill Gordin. A Masters World Champion on the track, Bill also has a bunch of Australian National Championships titles to his name. In addition to his achievements on the bike, Bill has also had an incredibly successful business career. He was founder of one of Australia's largest bicycle retailers, Bike Force, and more recently, Bill and his son have taken on a master franchise for the fitness brand CycleBar, an indoor cycling boutique, and they have plans to expand across the country. So, Bill, great to have you on the show. Can you maybe give us a quick update on CycleBar? It seems like a very exciting concept.
Yeah, thank you. Thanks for having me, firstly. CycleBar is, as you say, an indoor cycling studio. Spin cycling, for want of a better word. It's not like the old spin, but we've now got 7 studios sold across the country, 2 in Perth, 3 in Sydney, 1 in Melbourne, 1 in Brisbane. So they'll all start being developed and opened mid-year or between May and June. So it's been, we looked at trying, hoping to maybe 3 or 4 studios by mid-year, but it's been accepted so well, and the interest in it's been amazing. So we're super excited about it.
Yeah, and I mean here in Europe, Bill, I mean we've seen a massive uptick in virtual cycling, indoor cycling, related to, of course, the whole COVID-19, the pandemic.
Sure.
How is sort of the whole CycleBar sort of indoor cycling phenomenon been evolving in Australia over the last couple of years?
It's probably been stagnant in Australia. I look at it and when we first did some research on it, it was like you had your gyms at the top level. Underneath that, you had Pilates. Underneath that, you had yoga, and then a number of other things. And then cycling, or spin cycling, was pretty much at the bottom of that list. 20 years ago, it was popular to a degree. And that was the attraction, is that we believed that we could bring this model in. And, we're a concierge service, it's concert sound, it's change of lighting, it's very different to what the old spin was. It's a very, it's a great environment to be in. And so, we were hoping to have 300 members in our first studio within the first month of opening. We had 300 before we opened.
Wow.
And we're currently at 470 riders. So the uptake has been amazing. And, we spend a fair amount of time marketing the business. Obviously, that's just an ongoing thing. You can't market it and then leave it and hope that it's going to continue. So we've got a plan and a structure about how we do all that, and that's been the secret. And then making sure that when people come into the studio, that you're providing that experience that we're talking about in all our marketing.
Yep. Well, I guess experience is very important, because I think, when people think Australia, they think sunshine and beaches and open roads, that you should be cycling outside. So, I mean, what's the most attractive thing about a concept like CycleBar for that sort of core audience you're serving?
Yeah, I think the perception that we are chasing the cafe rider or the racing cyclist is wrong, because from the moment we started, our market was 25 to 55-year-old female. That was our predominant market. And out of our 470 members, there's probably 400 females. But that said, what's happened is we've had a few guys go in there, and then we're now getting classes. We have classes of roughly 44 people when they're full. And we're getting a dozen guys come in. So it's all been word of mouth. So they're all starting, whether they be triathletes or guys that do a bit of racing, are all starting to slowly move in, because it's in the racing scene, it's sort of seen as a bit girly, for want of a better description. But I can guarantee you, the guys friends of mine that I've persuaded to come in and have a go, have walked out absolutely legless. So,
I don't know, Bill. It sounds pretty good to me, mate. Who needs Tinder when you've got 400 ladies signed up and 12 guys? I think that sounds like a a pretty compelling proposition for a lot of people. But look, I mean, it's great to have the update on CycleBar. We'll provide a little bit of information as well, in the credits for this video. But why don't we talk about your life? I know Bernard's got a lot of questions because, of course, besides being an entrepreneur and a business person, you've also been riding your bike for a very long time. Bernard?
Yeah, Bill, it's a great story you're telling so far, but what interests me is how did it all started as a youth? What attracted you in sports and even more so in cycling?
I got brought up in a small country town called Esperance, which is 750 kilometres from Perth. So it's a little oasis, a long way from anywhere. And I played football, I played basketball, cricket. I did all the sports, all these team sports. And I loved football and I loved them all. But I felt like, I wasn't achieving what I wanted to achieve, because even if I played well, we could still lose. So that was my mentality about it. And then a friend, bought a racing bike. There was a club just starting to form. My dad wouldn't buy me one initially, but he got embarrassed into it by a friend of a friend, his father. And my first bike was $20 bike, a fixed wheel bike. And we used to have, my first race was in a straight line on a public road. And it was like a track handicap race. And so they marked it all out. And, that was my first race. So from a little country town, and the bug just got me from day one. I was reasonably, I finished second in my first race. And I was one of the stronger riders for whatever reason. And, I used to go out at lunchtimes and during when I was an apprentice cabinet maker, and go out and ride for 45 minutes of my lunch hour so that I could try and be better than the next person, try and bridge that gap to the better riders in the club. So that's where I started.
It's funny what you're saying there, Bill, because when I came to Europe and I explained what it was like racing as a youth in Australia, this whole concept of handicap racing was very foreign to the Europeans, because I think it originated from England actually, but in Australia it was kind of like athletic racing on a bike. So when you were doing a road race, you were handicapped. So you would have some guys heading off with a 5-minute advantage, and then you would have the 4-minute group and the 3-minute group, and then the scratchman. We always aspired to be part of the scratchman group. But it did, of course, develop a very special kind of racing, because it was full gas, from the start, and developing that real, how do you put it, guts and grit, because when you're in any one of those groups, there was no loafing, right? It's not like sitting in a peloton and sitting on the back cruising for the ride.
Yeah.
Very interesting. But how was it riding around the area of Esperance? Because, Bill, I grew up in Shepparton, in Victoria, in the southeast of Australia. And my ride was basically a 70-kilometre ride where I would do 20 kilometres in a straight line, turn left for another 20 kilometres, turn left for another 20 kilometres, and there was nothing but flat farm fields and the occasional orchard. How was it for you riding around the Esperance region?
Esperance was, I generally trained after work, so it was dark. And the lights we had then, I can't believe that I went into some of the places I went with basically a little candle on the front light, in the rear light. Just
with the dynamo.
I just can't believe I survived. In the middle of nowhere, pitch black, you couldn't see 20 feet in front of you. But we had flat roads. We had a couple of hills. We had a beach, a ride which started basically in the town, and then if you went along the coast, it was quite hilly. So you had to ride up what they call Wireless Hill to get to it, and then along the coast. So we had some good terrain, and we ended up after I won my first race after about 5 or 6 weeks. It was a handicap race. My dad all of a sudden become interested. He ended up being club president. They built a cycling track down there, so it become huge.
Yeah, it's amazing how that grassroots movements in many of these small towns across Australia happened. And again, where I grew up in Shepparton, we had an Olympic standard outdoor velodrome in a town of, at that time, 12,000 people. And there was this sort of grassroots, passion for it. When did you start to realize that you really did have some talent, not just in terms of the local cycling, but of course you did go on to state and national level? How did that evolve? And what was some of your fond memories of that racing more at the higher elite and national level?
Sure. My dad used to drive me up on a weekend during the winter. we're talking 7.5, 8 hour drive. He'd drive me up on Friday night. I'd race Saturday, and we'd drive back on Sunday. So he'd drive me up probably 4 or 5 times, in a winter season. And I did okay. I certainly wasn't winning, but I did okay enough to know that actually I'm competitive here. And then eventually I decided that, Perth had to be the place to be. I moved to Perth for that reason, to ride my bike. And I was only 15, I think, because I left school when I was 14, so I left very young. But at 15, I was a cabinet maker, or apprentice cabinet maker, and I decided Perth was a place to be. I worked really just to make ends meet. My whole life, even at that stage, was about riding my bike, because it gave me something I could really, strive for, and I was reasonably successful. I suppose the time that I really noticed is, I was up in Perth by myself, basically, sharing a place with some older guys, and I had to ride out to 20 kilometres to this bike shop to get my bike fixed on this Saturday morning. Then I had to ride from there 30 kilometres out to a state championship time trial, right? And it was over 20 kilometres, under 18 one, and I got second. So that was the first time I thought, oh, okay. And they ended up rerunning it for some reason 2 weeks later, and I got a lift out there and I won. So that was the point where I thought, oh, hang on, I've actually, got some, I can probably do this reasonably well if I commit to it.
So, and what were there any dreams sparkling then from going pro or coming to Europe?
Not that early, probably a year or so after that. Once I turned 18, I suppose, I then turned pro straight away, because I was a number 1 amateur in WA at that stage, and I was only 17 or 18. And so I turned pro, and that was a much stronger competition. Guys are a bit older. I think I went from being number 1 to about number 30 and hanging on for grim death. And that took me to another level. And so that following year, when I was 19, I won the Australian Championship, my first Australian Championship on the road, which was 100 kilometres. It's under 23 championship now. So that, and then the next day I rode a criterium race, which was an all-in criterium race with all the senior guys and that, and I finished second, which to this day I believe I could have won, but I couldn't get out to unleash. So that was the turning point. That was the point where I thought, no, I can be okay at this.
Yeah. And you did continue, as racing as a domestic pro for some years, but then you decided ultimately not to go on and pursue perhaps a step into Europe. What drove that decision to actually step away from your path that you'd been on as a domestic pro?
It was more about a financial decision more than anything else. My family had no money. I was living from week to week. I was winning some money, and which was probably the bonuses that I was getting, but we just didn't have the cash. And to go to Europe, I probably could have scraped it enough to get to an airfare, but I had no contacts. It was just the one thing in my life where I've gone left instead of right. Normally I would take that risk. I'm a risk taker. And it was the one time that I look back on that I didn't take the risk, and I don't regret it. I do look back and go, look at some of the old pros, the Alan Pipers and the Phil Andersons who I raced with here, and look back and sort of semi-regret it. But I got so much out of my business life, and then I was fortunate enough over a period of time to come back to cycling and be successful. I think it filled that void that I had for a long time because I didn't go to Europe. And I also saw a lot of guys go to Europe and come back with a tail between their legs, never really raced here again. They just got belted. And so from that point of view, I looked at it and thought, well, maybe my decision was correct.
Yep. Yeah, that makes complete sense, Bill. Of course, the era that you were talking about, there was no such thing at that time as the Australian Institute of Sport. There was no real structured path for young guys like yourself to make that journey into Europe. And you mentioned guys like Alan Piper. And of course, if you've read his book, you'll be absolutely astounded by the struggles and the adversity that he had to overcome just to race his bike at that time. Bernard, I know you've got some questions about what happened next with Bill. So why don't we move into that phase of Bill's life?
Yeah, well, it's interesting to see how humble you are about like how you did on the local scene, but you're talking about you were competing with world famous guys. So then now having your business, would you tell us what exactly of your, let's say, early cycling career are you taking with you in your entrepreneurship today? What are the main strengths that you recognize and take with you?
Probably the fact I never gave up. It sounds really basic, but it's really that simple. That I went through some good times, early days, and then some really dark times, in business for a couple of years, and came out at the end of that much wiser and much stronger. And I think the fact that I was prepared to learn and listen made a huge difference. So, in learning from mistakes, and it was no different from cycling. My very first coach always told me that you should learn more from your losses than your wins, because you want to know, and you also want to learn how you won. Why did you win? But your losses are so important that you don't get all grumpy about it. More or less, you look into it and go, well, what could I have done better, or could I have prepared better, or did I just make mistakes on the day? And those things are the things that I took into business, that I was prepared to learn. I was prepared to just keep getting up. Every time I got knocked down, I'd get back up, and we turned it into a very, very good business. But and being willing to do whatever you need to do to get the result. And in business, that may be as simple as picking up the broom. It's not that complicated. It's just about being focused on where you want to go, and having a picture of, or a dream that what you think this can do. And making sure that you just focus on that.
I mean, Bill, you're talking there about, setting goals for yourself, which of course, as an athlete, you do constantly.
Sure.
And so can you talk about that in terms of, were there differences between, what you saw in setting goals for yourself on the bike versus setting goals in business? Because one of the things you said very early on was that one of the things you loved about cycling was that it was very individual, that it was about me and my performance. But business is quite different to that, isn't it? Because you can set a goal, but it's not just you going to that goal. It's also how you bring other people along. Can you talk to us about that aspect?
Yeah, I think that's probably one of the things I probably struggled with early days, because I was brought up in a pretty average upbringing, for want of a better word. It was quite a violent upbringing. And so cycling gave me that out. It gave me that out to do my own thing and to control what I was doing. And, I was probably quite an angry person for a long time. I wasn't violent or anything like that, but it didn't take me much to get angry about something. And once I learned to control that, I was a much better person, a much better cyclist, and a much better business person. And it's funny, again, another coach of mine early days, he said, Bill, if we can ever channel that anger you have, you'll be world champion. And it took me, 50 years or 30 years to learn to channel it. But the thing was, once I learned that, and once I learned to admit and be able to talk about my upbringing and stuff like that, it made me a totally different person. And one of the things we do now, and we focused on with CycleBar, is to ensure that we bring in good people along. And we want the best people in our business. And, I want people in the business that are smarter than me, to, so that I can lean on them, they can lean on me. And I certainly have the experience, but they're going to have all the know-how and the smarts of what you need to do in business these days. So.
Yeah, that resonates totally to me. But when you look at what you're doing today, you're running your business, obviously, and you're still a very active cyclist. what would be advice for people that are kind of like struggling with the juggle of doing their hobby, their work, their family? How would you go? What would be your main advice there?
Being organised, I think, is the thing. Like I rode, even when I made my comeback, I was still working full time, and I'm still working full time right now. But I always, worked that I could train in the mornings, and I was home by 7:30, 8 o'clock in the morning, so I could, if my family were a bit older, so I didn't have to worry too much about that. But if your family's younger, then you're still home for breakfast and in time to go to work. So I encourage people to plan their day. Make sure you have to give time to yourself. You have to, whether that be going for a walk, riding a bike, or whatever. But as a business person, you can't just sit there and be 120% focused on that. You have to have a little bit of time for yourself to have that balance, and also allow time for your family, because something will give, and it will either be your family life will give, or your business life will suffer. So finding balance is the thing, and focus on what that balance is, whilst trying to ride, if you can ride early in the morning, like I go out at 5 o'clock now in the morning, and and I can do everything I need to do and not miss a moment of work if I need to.
Yeah. It's interesting what you say there, Bill, because I mean, that's certainly what a lot of the people who watch This Cycling Life are grappling with, juggling those three balls of their, their career, their family and relationships, and of course, then their passion for their bike. But I guess, one of the aspects of that is also about life stages, right? Because I mean, you became an entrepreneur in your 20s. You became a dad, and then,
Yeah.
so sometimes, we see people who are, say, in their mid-30s, and they're actually trying to do it all. They're trying to be super successful in their career, be a great parent, and be an elite masters athlete. For me, that's a very, very difficult kind of equation to add up. What's your view on that in terms of how we look at our life as an athlete, as an entrepreneur, as a parent, in terms of these stages that we go through?
I'd always put family first, regardless of anything. That's something that I've, just developed myself, that I would always, and I suppose that's a reflection of my upbringing, that I didn't have that. So I would always put family first. That's the number one priority. But if you can find I would suggest finding a coach that understands, if from a cycling perspective, finding a coach that understands the time you've got available, and you can do very, very well based on limited time. I think we all know that, these days in particular, with the different ways of training and stuff. So that's, if you really want to focus, really want to go well in your cycling. But the other thing is to be realistic and go, well, in this period of time, my focus is my family, and obviously I need to work. So maybe I can ride B grade instead of A grade. It's about taking that ego away for a little while and resting it on the side and looking at what's important to you. That's what I would look at. And I still raced right through till I was probably late 20s, and I had a young family and things like that. And it was a juggle, but we managed to do it. And but I always, it was always family first.
Yeah.
But you had to be well organised. You had to have, be well organised.
Yeah, and when you say well organized, it sounds obvious for me, for you, but can you explain that a little better, because it's a big word, being organized. But what do you understand exactly with that?
Well, I think from a business point of view, and it's really difficult if you work for yourself. But if you don't work for yourself, it's a bit easier, where you can segregate your time at work. So your time at work is your time at work. And then trying to, as I said, if you're getting up early to ride, and then allocating time for family before work and after work. Before work, obviously, it wouldn't be a long period, and it wouldn't be normally anyway for the average person. But allocating time after work, for reading books to your kids when they go to bed and things. It doesn't have to be, you don't have to spend 3 hours with them, but you've got to spend time with them every day possible. And so, it's about organising, your training in the morning, if that's when you can train, time early before work, to at least see your kids off to school, or at least see them if you can before they go to school. Again, it doesn't have to be long. They don't have to rely on you for that. But then spending time with them, doing your work, whether that's 8 or 10 hours a day, depending on your workload, trying to leave that at work, and then spending time with your family and your children after. Working for yourself, it's can be a little bit difficult because you do take your work home. But again, you've got to, I don't know whether I was that good at it, but you've got to try and put it aside and not, and make sure you're giving that time to the other people in your life.
Yeah, absolutely. It makes a lot of sense, Bill. The thing I'm really curious to hear about is like when did that fire start for you again? Like that real desire to say, you know what, I'm going to come back, and you have come back. I mean, when we look at what you've done in the last 10 years in terms of national world championships, can you just talk to us about that journey and how it felt early on? Because you were away from competition for a very long time.
Yeah, I was away for 20 plus years. So we moved to Melbourne. We moved to business. We decided we were going to relocate to Melbourne and relocate the business, the head office, to Melbourne instead of Perth. Based on that, we wanted to expand on the East Coast. And while you're on the West Coast, you're not really taken serious as such in business life. So we felt we weren't anyway. So we decided to move the whole family over to Melbourne. It was going to be a 2-year journey. It ended up 10. I have to say I loved my time in Melbourne. And so we moved the whole business over there. We sold a business here that we had, one of our stores we owned. We actually sold that off and then moved everything to Melbourne. Opened another retail, a very large retail store in Melbourne. And then, I was just riding my bike for fun. It was just riding my bike every now and then. And I heard about a group ride, which was in Melbourne, which left at 5:45 in the morning. So I went and joined that, and they would ride down to a place called Mordialloc, and then down along Beach Road back to the city. And from Beach Road to the city was just full gas. It was just full on. And it was, in the early days, I was probably 10 kilos overweight, and it was just over a period of time that probably about 8-week period that I got stronger and stronger and stronger. And it was riding regularly and doing this ride 2 days a week, that eventually I become one of the strongest guys in that group. And they would swap off turns at the front for that last 20 kilometres. And sometimes there was only 2 of us doing it, and we're doing 50 plus Ks an hour. And so from that, a couple of guys came up to me and said, you should race. And they didn't know who I was, what I'd done. And I said, look, I've done that. I've been there, done that. And I just left it at that. And every day they would be on me, you've got to race, you've got to race. So I relented and ended up going to St Kilda Cycling Club and rode B grade and finished 5th. I mucked up completely and finished 5th. And then I went to, over the next month, I won 8 B grade races at all different clubs. And so I was banned from riding B grade anywhere in Melbourne.
Right.
And then I was riding, as a 50-year-old, I was riding A grade in Melbourne. So that's sort of the story. I blame a couple of guys that, basically I say I got in with the wrong crowd.
Yeah.
And here I am.
Yeah. That's great to hear, Bill. And I mean, maybe you can talk to us a little bit about the differences, because I certainly experienced that. I raced as a young guy. Of course, mum and dad were there watching me, my friends. But I found it very different as an emotional experience, actually racing as a master. And, that feeling of standing on the podium in your 50s compared to standing on a podium in your teens or 20s. Can you talk to us about how you've experienced that?
No different to when I was 20. I loved it. Absolutely loved it. Like getting up on the podium is what you're racing for. And just that little bit of recognition, I suppose, goes with it. You're certainly not racing for the money or anything like that, but you're racing to you know, I'm a super competitive person anyway, as most cyclists are, but, you know, just to be there and like I got a big kick out of racing A grade being 50 years old and finishing in the top 10. To me, that was winning. That was like, you know, that was winning for me, you know, and people telling me I couldn't, you know, you'll never get back to being that strong as you were when you were 25 or 30. No, your heart rate won't go up the same. And like my average heart rate for a time trial is the same as it was when I was 25. You know, so, and, you know, there's certain areas that you obviously lose. You lose that little bit of speed. That was the one thing I learned. You know, I certainly learned to hang in with the top guys. I was smart enough to do that. I was strong enough to be there, but I couldn't sprint with them. Yet I could sprint with anyone else. I could only just hang on in the sprint. And that's why I was being, you know, anywhere from 6th to 10th. So, yeah, you lose your top end speed. But when you go back to racing 50-year-olds, they've lost their top end speed too, so it doesn't make any difference. But you can, you know, the numbers that you put out are certainly, you're certainly capable of putting out very similar numbers, and you probably, I don't know whether you can hold that power longer or whatever, but yeah, I certainly, you know, I put it down to most guys when they're in their, you know, masters ages, they go for a ride. I never went for a ride. My riding was to ride in that group and go as hard as I possibly can until I dropped. And that was the difference between me racing A grade and those guys not even being able to ride B grade properly. So that was the difference. It's just knowing, just working so much harder rather than just riding along and doing 2 hours or 3 hours and coming back, you know, a little bit tired, but no deep-seated fatigue.
Would you describe the mental difference, or no, the difference in enjoyment mentally about achieving something when you were 25 years old and now?
I think at 25 it was about driving myself, as I mentioned earlier, you know, just trying to achieve something that no one in my family, none of my cousins or anything like that had achieved. Nobody in my family achieved anything. And so it was about achieving something for myself, and probably to show them that I went out on my own and did okay. When I was 50, it was just about proving to myself that I could still do it, and that I sort of started, once I started racing, the idea was that I wanted to be the best 50-year-old cyclist in the country. That was my plan. And I achieved that, and I achieved that sort of going through the different ages and stuff like that. So that was always been my goal, was to try and be the best, you know, in my age group, whether it be, you know, it started off at national level and then it drifted, you know, for 10 years I chased in, you know, the world, you know, Grand Bondo championships and stuff like that, and the time trials, and I finished 4th in 2 of the time trials, but just couldn't get on the podium. And, you know, and then it turned out just by a mistake, really, or not a mistake, but a mate just, you know, wanting to, you know, go and ride the track national or track world championships in LA, and my son happened to live there at that time. It's the only reason I went. But we trained, you know, as I said, we trained super hard for it, but I didn't expect to go there and win 3 medals, let alone winning a championship. So, but, you know, it just goes to show you stay at something long enough.
That being the best at 50, isn't that translating in how you're running your business? Like being the best in the business as well too?
Yeah, it's the same principle. Like, we want to be the best in this business, and we want to take, you know, indoor cycling up alongside, just under the gyms and alongside Pilates and yoga and all those things. And we're doing that. We're proving that, you know, even though it's a small sample at the moment, we're proving that with, you know, with the studio that we've got open. And so it's exactly the same thing. And, you know, it's funny, I had a word to one of our staff the other day, and they'd done something not quite what we expect. And you know, my words were, that's not our gold standard. We need to make sure we maintain that gold standard. And that's all I had to say. I wasn't grumpy or growled at them. They just knew exactly what I meant. And so that's, you know, what we're striving to do.
Yeah.
Great.
Great. Good, Bill. Can you maybe just talk? I'd just love to hear from you. How were the emotions in LA? I mean, when you actually did get up to step on that podium and you were wearing that world champion jersey that you probably dreamed about when you were 17 years old, 16 years old. I mean, how was that emotionally as an experience in your life?
I've stood at the World Grand Fondo Championships, time trial championships, and seen people get up there, and I've gone, I want that. I want that. I want to hear the national anthem, and stand up there. So when I got up there in LA, it was like I was dumbstruck. I was nearly in tears. If I had been looking, and my son was there, his wife and my grandchildren there. And luckily, I couldn't look at them because I would have been up on the podium, with tears running down. But I've got a photo that you can see that I'm just holding it back as much as I possibly can, and I unashamedly, proud of that fact. That I was so emotional about it, and then so excited. The emotion came in first, and the excitement came later when I realised what I'd done. Great moment.
And did you get a chance to get back to St Kilda with those guys wearing that jersey, Bill? Was that?
Well, St Kilda were amazing. They presented me with a club jersey with the world stripes on it at one of the criterion. So they were amazing. They really supported me, and were very encouraging and all that sort of thing. They were fantastic. A fantastic club.
Great. But Bernard, as I'm listening to Bill, I'm reflecting on the TED talk that you gave recently, actually, which talked about the winner's mindset. And I think it might be interesting. I mean, because Bernard, you talk about self, and the mindset. Could you maybe just frame that for us? Because I think everything that Bill has talked to us about today covers everything that you spoke about in your talk.
Well, yes. Well, the self stands for self-belief, enjoyment, leading language, and fortitude. So you're talking all the time about believing in yourself and that you wanted to prove that, and you did it. Then everything that you were doing had a certain joy, even in your business. And then what struck me the most was your leading language, when you just said, like, this is not our golden standard, or you said it somewhere like that. And then the fortitude is, well, the proof of your entire career, starting as a young kid riding a bike. Your dad brought you 700 kilometers far away to do things, and now you build up a business like that. To me, this is really the proof of a winner's mindset of a person that found what he wanted to do.
It's certainly not one thing. It's a number of things, whether it be making, decisions, being prepared to make decisions, whether they tough or not, having courage to take on new challenges, all those sorts of things, and being resilient. We talk about cyclists being resilient, and there's no better word, I don't think, as being, we are resilient. We keep bouncing back, and it just, as I said, the focus, the whole thing, there's lots of pieces to the puzzle, and if you can put them all together, and learning, I think listening and learning is probably the biggest thing I learned. Was listening from people. I love listening to people that whether they're doing talks or successful people from all walks of life. You learn something from everybody if you're prepared to listen. There's a difference between hearing and listening.
Exactly.
You can hear something, but whether you're listening or not, it's a different story. And like I've dabbled in lots of things and tried to help people along the way, and sometimes you just go, they're not listening.
Yeah, well, you're
hearing,
right.
but they're not listening.
Because when you really hear what you need to hear and you learn from it, then you get an ability that sometimes you can turn obstacles into opportunities, or at least into starting points. And that's what you did most probably and over your entire career. So yeah, that's great.
Thank
so
you.
we're going to wrap it up very soon. But
Sure.
An interesting thing, of course, is that, when we achieve things in life, and certainly for you standing on that podium in LA, it's an incredible feeling. But then there's also the tendency for people to come to us and say, but what's next? I mean, To what
Yeah.
extent is that important? You know, I mean, because sometimes we do become too goal oriented or too goal focused. Are there also times in your life where you're just happy to just cruise, just to do what you're doing and not be too focused or obsessed about that next goal? Is that maybe something you've had to learn along the way?
Yeah, it is. I've certainly had to learn that along the way, but I think winning in LA initially, it gave me, obviously that, that knowledge that I've achieved what I wanted to achieve, but it also came with a bit of a lead weight as well, because on myself, not from probably anyone else, but on myself, that I then had a standard to meet as a cyclist racing. And I probably raced the full criterion season with that lead weight. And I did okay, but I can't say it was the most enjoyable season I've had, because I felt that because I'd won a world champion and I was current world champion, I had to be, the best every time. And it's just not possible.
Yeah.
It's just not possible. So the lesson I learned from that was that it's not possible, that I can proudly wear the stripes any day of the week, and I do, but I don't have to prove anything. So I can step back now, and I'm happy to have a few beers and relax and do those things and step away from it for a while. It doesn't take me long to want to get back.
Yeah.
But quite often I need that period. That can be a week, it could be a month, but it's generally quite it's generally a reasonably short period. It's within a 2 to 3 week period that I can go, okay, I've had my my holiday or rest or whatever you want to call it. Now I'll go back into some sort of structure, and that structure doesn't have to be aiming to win anything. It's just to be aiming to get fit. I suppose at the moment I'm in that that place at the moment. I was quite sick for 3 or 4 weeks. And now I'm just getting back on the bike now. So now I'll just go through a plan of, enjoying it. And then once I'm fit enough, I'll then go into doing, planning something. I'd certainly like to go back to ride the track again in LA this year, but whether that's ever going to happen or not, it's another story. And I'd certainly go back to ride the Grand Fondo World Championships as well, because that's a little bit of a unfinished business as well. So,
that's great, Bill. LA's on my plan also for this year, so hopefully we'll have a chance to meet face to face in LA. The other thing, of course, to keep in mind, which my kids remind me all the time, is the last time we went to the World Championships, they saw actually the medal being awarded for the 100 plus category, which the UCI has now introduced. So, my kids just turned to me and said, listen, Dad, you just keep trying. You've got another 50 years to win that medal. So, I think, but also, Bill, I think that is very important, that, we as often driven people, as very motivated people, we tend to have a little bit of a too short time horizon. We want everything and we want it now. And I think that's something which we also have to learn, is that, life is long. And certainly as a masters athlete, if it's not going to be this year, if life gets in the way, if a pandemic gets in the way, or, your work gets in the way, family commitments are there, then it's okay, because most of us have another 20, 30, even 40 years ahead of us as cyclists. So we sometimes need to keep that perspective.
For sure. That's, certainly, I think the pandemic has certainly taught us a bit of patience, to be patient and not, it's just what it is now. So, the idea is that if you do need time away from it, then take it. It's not the end. In fact, it can be good for you.
Excellent. Okay, with that, Bernard Moerman, Bill Gordin, I'd like to thank you both for this fascinating interview. Bill, you mentioned the importance of learning, and especially, connecting and learning from people with wisdom. And I would just like to thank you for sharing your incredible wisdom with our audience today. I think you've really offered some very practical, pragmatic, and really down-to-earth advice for people to juggle those three balls, that we've been talking about. So, Bill Gordin, entrepreneur, world champion, great dad, parent, and grandfather as well. It's been an absolute pleasure to have you on This Cycling Life, and we wish you every success for the future. For those of you who've been watching, if you have enjoyed this video, of course, please do give us the thumbs up and slam that subscribe button. So Bill Gordin, again, thank you very much.
Thank you
It was
very
a
much.
pleasure.
Thanks for having me.